I came to be an activist through multiple encouragements. First, witnessing the injustice of apartheid firsthand. Being a victim of it was also a driver, but also having around me inspiring leaders who were willing to take a risk, willing to put their lives on the line, willing to go to prison, who inspired us to believe that our contribution, our engagement, our involvement was critical for the success of the overall struggle. I also had the opportunity of being exposed to literature that spoke about the injustices. I had high school teachers, university lecturers, and so on, who also helped educate me about the fundamental injustices in the world. So those are the kinds of things, I think, that inform any person from the route of observing injustice to becoming a campaigner and an activist. I think that where there is a personal motivation, meaning where in fact the activist in question is not only standing up in solidarity with the cause, but is also directly affected, often that means that person can speak with greater authenticity, or greater integrity, and so on, because they're not engaging from a theoretical perspective, they're not engaging from an experiential vacuum, they are engaging from their own life experience. However, I don't think that means that you have to suffer injustice to stand up against injustice. I think that those who maybe stand up against racism, even though they are not discriminated, or stand up against gender inequality, even if they are not affected in a negative way, for example, men who stand up against gender equality, I think all of the people who act in solidarity in activism absolutely have a place and have the right to claim the title or the badge of activist campaigner. However, it's important that those that have that as a starting point have even a higher level of humility, listening, engaging, and letting the actual advocacy asks not come from the wisdom of a person who's not necessarily suffering from the issue, but to ensure that the eloquence of those that suffer injustice, suffer poverty, is heard, because I believe that is more persuasive at the end of the day. So there's space for everybody to be involved as campaigners and activists, whether you are directly affected or not. However, I think if you're directly affected, you can bring a certain power, persuasion, and clarity to movements in a way that those that are not directly affected are not able to bring. However, those that are not directly affected can have other comparative advantages, such as they might not have the same security restrictions, they might be able to raise more resources for the fight, and so on. So we need both. Those that are directly affected and those that have the decency to stand up and say, even though it doesn't affect me, I'm willing to actually put my life on the line, contribute, sacrifice, and be part of the struggle, whether it's to end global poverty or whether it's to avert catastrophic climate change or any other issue of social, economic, environmental, or gender justice. The recipe for creating messages that mobilize, I think, is quite simple. I think it is really about not projecting your consciousness as an activist on those that you are trying to organize, but to actually take a step back, ask yourself, what is the understanding of the people who we're trying to work with and organize, and start from their knowledge and build from that upwards. In fact, one of the proverbs that informed my activism came out of Asia, which said, go to the people, live with them, learn from them, build on what they know, start with what they understand. When the struggle is won, the people should say, we have done it ourselves. Now, one of the problems of activism is quite often we make posters, placards, and so on that speak to the people that are already on board, rather than speaking to people who are yet to be converted. I'll give you an example. I took part in a action in Greenland to stop drilling of oil in the Arctic. And while I was on the inflatable to the event, I looked at the banner and it said, "Stop Arctic Destruction." And I thought, wow, if anything happens and we don't make it back live from here, the last banner I would have been holding, 90% of the people in my life wouldn't know what it meant. In fact, talking to my daughter, she said, you know, Dad, a better slogan would have been, "Save Santa Claus now," because that's the only major association that people have about the Arctic. So about getting good messages, it's about humbling yourself, understanding where people are, and coming up with messaging that is simple but not simplistic, that is understandable and accessible. But really good messaging is one which either has a component of humor or a component of tragedy and horror and shock of the injustice. Bearing witness as an approach that Greenpeace drew from Quakerism actually is a very simple idea. It says that we all have an obligation, if we know there's an injustice, however remote a place where it might be taking place. And for Greenpeace, it's, you know, sometimes very far out in our oceans, for example in the Arctic, or deep in our forests and so on. So bearing witness is about saying we have an obligation to go document, highlight and tell the world about an injustice that you've seen with your own eyes. And then by doing that, by bearing witness to the injustice, you're then giving those that are informed about it the moral choice about whether they want to stand up and speak out against it, to be indifferent, or to even, you know, collaborate with it. Our job is to, obviously, when we bear witness, is with the hope that people will be outraged to the point that they will say enough is enough, and I'm prepared to get involved directly to stop this environmental injustice taking place, for example. Understanding how successful a movement or an NGO is quite a difficult thing to measure. As Albert Einstein once said, not everything that counts can be measured, and not everything that can be measured counts. So trying to assess how successful we are, I think NGOs and movements, social movements, must do so with as much humility as possible. Because at Greenpeace, I say, for example, to my colleagues, you know, we are winning important big battles, but we're losing the planet and we're losing the war to avert catastrophic climate change. I think being able to speak about the challenges, the fact that you are making progress but not fast enough progress, is all very important. How do you know, though, when you are reaching the tipping point of getting more and more people? That is usually expressed by a range of indicators of whether people are gravitating towards the issue that you're trying to organize on. So the numbers of people that are turning up for meetings or signing up for petitions or donating money and other resources to help with the campaign, these are usually the kind of indications that you're reaching critical mass. The other is whether you're getting mass media penetration. Usually, if you are able to get your issue in the national or global media, then you know that you've put those with power that you are resisting on notice. And because the media speaks to their customers, their voters and so on, that is also another indication that in fact you are beginning to break through and get your message across. Big international NGOs like Greenpeace, Save the Children and so on have a very important role to play in advancing economic justice, social justice, environmental justice and so on. However, it's very important that international NGOs also understand their limitations. International NGOs still largely reflect a developed world domination and presence and resourcing and so on. That's the reality of the situation that we find ourselves in. Therefore, it's critically important that on the one hand, all international NGOs try to become truly global, whether it's their boards, their staffing, their resource expenditure, and so on, so that we are as global as the challenges that we're seeking, to address. However, for us to be successful, we have to have much closer, much more respectful, much more consultative relationships with social movements. If I look at the work Greenpeace is doing and where we've been successful, whether it's in the Amazon in Brazil or the Sumatran rainforest in Indonesia, or fighting the raping of the West African coast by European and other fishing trawlers in Senegal, for example, all those victories that we've had in those struggles were primarily because we engaged with the social movements, whether it was the women's movements, the trade union, landless people's movements in West Africa, the movement of fisher folk and so on. I believe that if NGOs, particularly international NGOs, do not make common cause with social movements, we deprive ourselves of an opportunity of having much bigger impact, because when we act as NGOs together with social movements, I believe it strengthens social movements as well as strengthens NGOs, and we should be in these struggles together. To young people across the world, I would say that history is placing an enormously big burden on you. Firstly, the sad reality is the current generation of adult leaders are not showing, in fact, are disgracefully not showing any sense of intergenerational solidarity. Our adult leadership at the moment is governing our planet as if we don't have children, we don't have grandchildren, that that life in the future is irrelevant, because already we're spending twice as much of resources than what this planet can actually afford to spend. So when we look at the role of young people, they have the most to gain by actually being as energetically involved in the fight to avert catastrophic climate change, because they will inherit the future. So I jokingly say to young people, don't bank on the current bunch of adult leaders. They're the biggest bunch of losers you're going to find. Don't accept that young people are the leaders of tomorrow, because the older generation have run out of fresh ideas and cannot imagine a fundamentally different way of running our planet, and that is going to come from young people. So I'd say to young people, don't accept that you are leaders of tomorrow, assert that you are leaders of today, because if we look at some of the recent historical shifts towards greater justice and greater fairness and so on, whether it was the Arab Spring, whether it was the struggle to end apartheid, whether it's the ongoing struggles to reform the unjust global financial system that we live under as expressed by Occupy, you will see all of those movements were driven by young people. And we need to, on the one hand, celebrate what young people can bring to this fight for social, economic, environmental, and gender justice. On the other hand, we also should recognize that the adult leadership of today, including in the NGO sector, must make space for the emergence of new leaders who we might call young today, but we should also call them and consider them to be, especially those that are already showing leadership, as genuine leaders, not just of tomorrow, but of today.